Observatory Act Repeal Bill read a third time. I now call David Shearer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's very good that we are able to move so quickly tonight to get this piece of legislation through the House. I know there are probably a number of people from the Carter Observatory are possibly watching this, wondering why this arcane method of getting something as simple and as bipartisan as this is taking such a long time. But so I'm beginning to learn as the way of Parliament. As 1938 was the opening of the observatory, as the Minister just said, and 1977 was when it was made a national observatory. And I think in many ways, many of the scientists of the time believed that the observatory really was the national observatory even before it was formalised. It's had a pretty mixed time since then. There has been some disagreements within the management of the observatory. There was some problems along the funding of the observatory, and I want to come back to that. That was something that Sue Kedgley raised. And it has led to us today to believe that the Mount St John Observatory, the Carter Observatory, is best served as a visitor and tourist asset to the City of Wellington rather than as its national observatory. And many of the scientific functions have moved instead to the Mount St John Observatory that is administered largely by Canterbury University, but as the Minister said, in collaboration with a number of other universities throughout the world, but a number of US universities throughout the world in particular. It's very heartening, I think, to see that we are taking such a prominent role, and I think this is again the part of the bipartisan nature of science in this country, with the Square Kilometre Array, putting forward our bid to take that on with Australia. This will certainly give the New Zealand science community, the New Zealand astronomical community, a real boost should we win that when the announcement is made in 2012. The issue is, of course, that and when we look back on the Carter Observatory, I think we can learn a few lessons about the way that it has proceeded over time. One of the lessons, I think, as Sir Kedgley spoke up before, is about funding. You cannot do science without funding. The government needed to put $2 million into the Carter Observatory. The Wellington City Council put $1.4 million in and is looking at another $300,000 a year to ensure that the upkeep. I mean, that's quite an expensive commitment to take on. Yet it's a real treasure. And I wanted to mention, as an aside, one part of the treasure, which is the fantastic library that the Carter Observatory has there. That hasn't come up in the conversation, but is also an asset to the Wellington City Council. But the funding issue is a real and pertinent one, and the Minister just mentioned the amount of funding that they are putting as part of their science package in the budget forward. I mean, it was the third largest after health and education commitment in the budget in terms of new money. $56 million worth of new money. Nobody's going to scoff at that. A lot less than what would have happened if the 15% tax credit had been left in place. But let's look at that $56 million, because in a sense that's what? About 7%, 7 and a bit percent of the actual science budget that we're seeing as new money. Take into account, Mr Speaker, the inflation rate of 5.9%, and suddenly that 7% starts to look a little bit weak. And then if you talk to any scientist in this country, any scientist at all, about the amount of money that's being put in, they'll tell you that the inflation rate for science is actually quite a lot higher than our domestic science inflation rate, for the simple reason that we have to import most of our equipment from overseas. So suddenly that third largest amount of money that has been poured into the science community through the budget is starting to look actually rather pathetic. And certainly pathetic in terms of the amount of money that would have gone forward as part of the tax credits, and of the amount of money that would have stimulated businesses as an incentive rather than a handout as a grant, as an incentive to business to increase their own commitment and their own commitment into R&D. But let's talk about another thing in terms of funding, Mr. Speaker, today, because today we had this remarkable announcement. We've been waiting for it for a long time, that the Primary Growth Partnership finally has agreed to fund 3 projects. Finally. And the Minister of Agriculture, who happens to be in the House at the moment, said he makes no apologies for the delay in the delivery of the Primary Growth Partnership. Makes no apologies. Well, my feeling, Mr. Speaker, is he should apologise. He should apologise to the scientists who have been sitting there for 18 months, unfunded, without waiting for money to be able to fund the science. Not only that, Mr. Speaker, but the business community who are waiting for the government to make their announcement so they could pledge their half of the deal as well. They've been sitting there and wasted. And Mr. Speaker, it is actually about 18 months, because if you look at when the Fast Forward Fund was demolished at the end of 2008, Fast Forward Fund demolished in 2008, and where are we now? I think it's April 2010. May 2010, we're not going to get any money out the door before June, July. It's probably closer to 20 months that have been wasted. Now, think about that in any other sector, Mr. Speaker. Think about that, what would have happened in the health sector, in the police and policing sector, if suddenly the police were left bereft of $60 million that they weren't able to use for 18 months. Imagine the outcry if that had happened. But no, the science sector can be quietly pushed aside and discarded simply because this minister hasn't been able to push this thing through as fast as he said he could. The Fast Forward Fund was already in place. It was already set up. The money was already in the account. The money was in the account, Mr. Carter, because I've seen the books, and the money was there, and it was hauled out and put into some other trite scheme that this government is trying to run through in the last budget. We could have had, Mr. Speaker, we could have had $1,000 million over the next little while, matched with business, $2 billion worth of funding going into our primary produce. Instead, what we did was we allowed that to fall over. And it's a real shame, because I think in 2011, when we have a change of government, I think what we will look at doing is making sure that continuity is maintained. That continuity, Mr. Speaker, is maintained, because I do believe, as I said as I opened up this discussion on the Carter Observatory, that bipartisanship is an important aspect of science. Let me raise just one other issue in terms of science. One of the things that we have done as the government in the 9 years that we were in office was to support the science sector in schools. The Carter Observatory, as many people have quite rightly noted, is part of many of the Wellington schools' curriculum in science. What's this government done with their national standards is to focus their attention on maths and English and discard science. Science advisors are being half funded of what they were before. Now, you ask any secondary teacher, ask Mr. Peachy, for example, a teacher, ask myself, who was a secondary teacher for some time, and I will tell you that having science support come and back you up is an incredibly important means of making you up to date and giving you the enthusiasm to ensure that science is well taught and the enthusiasm of students is carried forth. That, Mr. Speaker, has now gone. So what have we got? We've got a Carter Observatory that we know is one of its failings was the fact that it didn't have enough money, and yet we've got a government here which is underfunded in comparison to what was there, underfunded half of what it promised in 2008, half of what the Labor government had already in place, crashed the Fast Forward Fund and put in the PGP, which has yet to deliver. Not $1 has gone out yet. We've approved 3 projects, and they're good projects, I will admit. They are very good projects. But those that PGP is only